Today we will be discussing the Offerzen 2021 State of the Software and Developer Nation survey done by Offerzen, and we will be discussing back-end frameworks. Over to you, Maarten.
Thanks, Melanie. So last week we spoke about some of the most popular frameworks out there, which is quite relevant for businesses because it determines, what technology you be using for systems in your business. So we focused, as you mentioned, on front-end systems. Now, the interesting thing about the survey is it mixes front-end and back-end systems. So I'm just going to start, maybe the first thing to explain is what is a back-end system. So I'm just going to continue where we left off last week, where we talked about, what's a front-end system, and we just briefly mentioned that the information required by the front-end framework comes from a back-end framework. Now, the back-end framework runs on the server, and it's pretty much where you have an API that's got multiple controllers getting information out of the database. So everything you see here can be a lot of development for developers. So it's pretty much like when you're building a house, you put in a foundation, you put, plumbing in and all kinds of electrical infrastructure. So just imagine you can purchase that and have it delivered at a specific property, and doof, all of that's there. So a developer doesn't have to waste a lot of time and effort, and you don't have to pay a lot of money to put in this basic infrastructure. It's just there. And this is pretty much what a backend brings to the table. So
right.
If I can just, so where do languages come in? And this is something that's a little bit confusing, can be a little bit confusing. You've got a backend framework that's pretty much like I just mentioned, all this infrastructure. But then you add custom functionality to the framework, and this is where languages comes in. So I've just taken a screenshot of the part of the report that talks about the popularity of languages. Now, so you can see by far the most popular language here is Python. Now, when I first saw the report, I was a little bit surprised because Python is a very old language, not one of the new kids on the block. It's been around probably since the 1980s, and it started off as being a scientific language. So you might be wondering, why is such an old and what can be sort of classified as also a slow language so popular? And so the short answer is the fact that it's so old means that there's so much libraries available for it. And the fact that there's not a company behind it, there's a lot of trust and there's a large community behind it. And it's also, it handles big data quite well. Now, big data is very relevant for artificial intelligence. So Python is a very easy language to learn. There's a large community that supports it, and you can use it with cutting-edge technologies like AI. So the combination of those factors puts it at number one at 38% in terms of popularity. And the two that's just closely behind it is on the other side. Well, JavaScript is also an old language, but JavaScript and TypeScript, both of these languages, let's start with JavaScript. JavaScript, it came out in the 1990s as the internet was sort of getting traction. And as I explained in the previous video, it's if you have a web page, the HTML file says there's a button, the CSS file says the button must be blue, the JavaScript says what must happen when you click the button. So all the functionality, when things animate or change, or if something else is called, everything that happens programmatically on a web page in your web browser is done to JavaScript. So just the fact that it's used in that context means it's already must have a lot of popularity because there's so much that's being done in JavaScript. Now, JavaScript, because it was such an old language, it was originally developed to run in the front end of web browsers. There was a lot of advanced functionality that wasn't available in it. And TypeScript is basically an evolution of JavaScript built on top of JavaScript that basically adds that functionality. So you can almost group these two together. So you can see Python by far the most popular language. And in the second place, if you combine these two, it's almost 40%. So these are the two big boys. Okay, so if I then just go on to, so these are the frameworks that you just saw on the Offerzen. So I tried to put them in order of popularity as they appear on the basically on the survey. So something that's just also quite important to note that in your backend frameworks, ASP.NET, most people have heard about it, that was developed by Microsoft. So Microsoft has invested about $12 billion into their development of ASP.NET.
Wow.
So it's a huge financial investment. Now, ASP.NET was traditionally developed to run on Microsoft and Windows platforms, which is also obviously developed by Microsoft. And so basically what happened is ASP.NET version 1 to 4 was Windows only. Then Microsoft released .NET Core, which is a newer generation of ASP.NET. It's a complete rewrite. And that basically from after .NET Core was established, that was then ASP.NET version 5 and upwards. So this is the old technology version 1 to 4, and this is the new technology version 5 and upwards. Now, what is interesting to note is that currently in South Africa, a lot of systems are using this. If you combine these two together, you're almost sitting at 60%.
Yes.
So the bigger question for me is, are people moving from the old Windows Microsoft technology to the new technology in terms of backend frameworks? Now, you can see that this one is dying. So there's no surprise here. It's going from 30% to 11% interest for developers to work on. That's no surprise. But the thing that is a little bit concerning is that your 28%, you've got current usage on the new technology and there's only 18% interest. So there's still a downwards, and if you add these two, it only adds up to about 30%. So you're going from 60% to 30%. So, it doesn't seem like Microsoft's ASP.NET technology is going to be the leader in the long term. There is a sort of a trend that it's on the decline. Okay, so that is, if I can just go back to this diagram, so that covers the top two. Now you're sitting with the number in the third position as far as backend frameworks are concerned. You're sitting with something that's called Node.js. Now, as I mentioned, JavaScript was originally developed as a language which is used in the front end in your web browser. It's got nothing to do with your server. It doesn't run on a server. But now Node.js made it possible. So there's a lot of web designers out there doing front-end work, graphic designers, people with a big interest in the user interface and the front end of systems who had these JavaScript skills, but they couldn't use it in any way except in the front end of web browsers. But then Node.js was quite revolutionary in that it opened the door for these people with a skill set to actually do back-end development. And now you can actually use JavaScript on the back end, on the server side of things, which is a huge revolutionary thing in the industry. And that's also one of the reasons why, if you go back to the languages diagram that we just discussed, you see that JavaScript is so high in popularity because it's not just a front end, old front end technology, it's now also a back end technology. And this means that people can now do the front end development and the back end development using a single language, which is a big attraction for developers. And then we have in the fourth position, you've got basically Java. Now, what is important to note is that Java is one of the least preferred languages in terms of popularity. So if I can just quickly go to this survey in terms of languages. Okay, languages developers dislike working in. So you can see here, the number one most disliked language is PHP, and the third one is Java. So this is also a warning sign that, the writing's on the wall for Java. There's people don't want to work with it anymore. You can see a decline of 70% to 8%. That's
that's significant.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, disliked by everyone. Everyone dislikes Java, 70% of the community. People who are currently using Java, 8.5% dislikes it. Okay. So just going back to our diagram over here, so that's Java. Then you've got frameworks that developers use Python in. As I mentioned, Python is the most popular language in the world for, because of AI and etc. Now you've got two frameworks there, Django and Flask. Although they're sitting in the number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th and 6th positions, both of them are Python. And the other interesting thing is that their popularity is on the increase. So if I can just go back to the platforms over here, If you look at Django, there's an increase of 9 to 13%, and for Flask 8. So it seems to follow the same trend in popularity of Python. So that's something to take note of. And then we get to the next one is Laravel. Now, Laravel, the language that's being used there is PHP. Now, PHP is the same language that's used to, in which WordPress was created. And it's also the language in which WordPress add-ons are created. Now, you'll notice that WordPress is not mentioned here in back-end frameworks because technically it's not really a platform that developers use to extend functionality on. It's more of like a software program that you install on the web server, and it makes it really easy for you to develop brochure websites. Now, the disconcerting thing about PHP is that if you look on your most disliked languages, let's just see if we can find that again. There we go. Most disliked computer languages, you'll see #1 position, PHP. So this is concerning for people who currently have WordPress and doing custom plugins, developing in PHP. In the future, you might struggle to find developers who want to work in it, or who think it's a great idea to invest in PHP as a language. So this is something to also take note of.
If you've got a WordPress website, what would happen then? What are your solutions in terms of being it built in PHP and then wanting to add automation?
Sure. So PHP is great for creating creating brochure websites, something that's, like an online brochure of about us, contact us, basic information about your business, because it's really quick and easy to create a website in that. And now I'm not saying WordPress is going to go away. The only thing that concerns me is that if you want to develop these custom plugins, you might struggle to get developers, and the popularity of that's not, and there are good reasons for it. Which is a bit technical. I don't want to go into too much detail as far as that concerns. So an alternative would be to keep your brochure website on in WordPress. But if you want to create a backend system, a portal or a place where your customers can log in, or your employees can log in, or internal users or suppliers, rather develop that as a separate system, which makes use of one of these popular backend frameworks. Rather use one of these. And Laravel is not WordPress, it's also just a framework. I wouldn't recommend going the Laravel route at this stage because the popularity is dwindling. And there are actually a lot of developing companies in South Africa which actually use Laravel. And I think they will probably need to make a change in the future.
Great stuff. Onto the blue blocks.
Okay, the blue blocks. So these are backend frameworks. You can think of them as almost as software programs, almost. that gives backend developers a lot of functionality out of the box. So how do you extend that functionality? Now you need to use a programming language to extend it. So you can see in the ASP.NET family, with .NET and .core, the most popular language that you use, you can use multiple like VB, etc., but C# is the most popular one. So here you have to use C#. Now C# is currently in 5th position as far as popularity in languages are concerned, which is also not a great, it's not a fantastically high number, although 20% is not lagging too far behind. Then when we talk about Node, as I mentioned before, it's you develop in JavaScript, which is in 3rd position, or TypeScript, which is in 2nd position. And these are very popular languages. Obviously, the Java Spring framework, you're going to use Java, which is in 6th position, and one of the, the 3rd most disliked languages at this stage. Then with Django and Flask, obviously Python is in the 1st position, and then PHP sitting in the 14th position.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not great. So once again, okay, so now you have these choices. So which one do you choose? And the important thing is, most companies won't be developing their own systems. So it's more a matter of the people who are developing systems for them, which one should you be glad to hear that they're using, and which ones should you be slightly worried about?
Yes.
So let's try and differentiate. I had quite a long discussion with us because I'm not a hands-on developer anymore. So I'm a systems architect. So I had a long chat with our senior developers just to understand what do they prefer, because they've got experience in multiple tech stacks. And the short answer is you have to use the right tool for the right job. So what are the determining factors? So the great news is that if you want to go enterprise ready, if you're using ActiveX, you have serious IT infrastructure, then you basically have two choices: .NET Core or Java. Java Enterprise with Spring framework running on top of it. Now, these are enterprise ready out of the box. It's got ActiveX directory, Active Directory and Exchange integration. That's flawless. There's a growing community on .NET, but because of a big anti-Microsoft sentiment, it's not as big as certain other frameworks. Now, the good news is that Java's got a large community, larger than .NET, but as I said, it's a platform, the language and platform is dwindling in popularity. So if I can be as bold as to say you pretty much only have one choice if you want to go enterprise ready, and that's .NET Core.
Sure.
Now if you so if you want to go rapid application development, in other words, you want to get a product out there in the market quickly, and enterprise readiness is not a big factor, then Node.js is a popular choice because sitting at position number 3. And you can also consider Django and Flask, because all of these have got large communities and code libraries and whatever. But I think because Python is such an old language, you have got more code libraries out there. So if reusable code is the biggest factor, then you're probably sitting, with these as your number one choice. I just want to note something else, that in terms of performance, .NET Core is actually faster than Node.js. But which is, so you would think, it's the logical choice, but what makes it interesting is that the memory usage on .NET Core is actually higher than Node.js. So although it's faster, it actually uses more memory. Now, if you're going to be hosting your solution virtually and you're actually paying for the amount of memory you're using, and you're paying, then you're actually going to be paying more on .NET Core to host it than Node.js. So
that's a big consideration.
It is a big consideration when you talk about scalability. Now, if you've got a dedicated server, we've got resources to spare. Like for example, we at Tech Genius, we've got a dedicated server, and we put all our clients' solutions on a single server. Then it's not as important. We've got memory to spare. But if you're going the route of hosting on AWS, Amazon, or you're going the route of on Google's cloud platform, etc., or Microsoft Azure, then you're paying for what you're using. So it's an important factor to take into consideration. So I think those were the main points that I wanted to highlight. I don't know if you've got any questions, or this topic feels very technical to me, so please, you're welcome to chip in.
I think it is quite technical, but it's very interesting what they've noted in the different survey fields in terms of the languages and in terms of the frameworks and that type of stuff. So it's always interesting to know what you should be doing and what questions you should be asking when you're looking at building your systems. So Maarten, overall, what is your takeaway from all of this?
I think it is important to take note of that the trends are changing. I mean, years ago, Java was king of the hill. I mean, if you would have talked about web frameworks, in my opinion, Python would have been nowhere. JavaScript wasn't even available. So now if you can time travel from 10 years ago to today, I mean, people would be absolutely shocked if you showed this report. This is what it's going to look like 10 years from now. So,
I'm pretty sure.
So what we're doing as Tech Genius is we're taking note of this, and the important takeaway is that we are not just limiting ourselves to a single tech stack. We have developers who are using different tech stacks, and we're continually revising the decision, are we on the best backend framework? Now, the good news is, and the big takeaway here is, in the previous discussion, we mentioned get yourself on a front-end framework. Because if you can stay on the front end Angular, the front end framework, whether you choose Angular or React or whatever, if you're on a front end framework and your back end framework is completely separate, then it's only on average half of your system that needs to be redeveloped if it's necessary. What is even just to throw a spanner in the works, you don't even have to be exclusive on the backend system. You can do some of the backend system in .NET Core, and you can do some of it, on a different framework, because you can run multiple instances of these backend services on the same server, or even on different servers. So I think what's important is if you're having a system developed, you try and use a service provider that's aware of the different tech stacks, that's not just limiting themselves to a single tech stack, and can move when it's necessary, and also advise you, which is the best fit for your business, not just recommend the single one that they're most comfortable working in.
Well, thank you, Maarten. That's all from me, Melanie Foxcroft from MF Consulting. Thank you again, Maarten from Tech Genius, and we'll see you next time.